It was January the 27th, 1978, around 5:45 p.m, and dusk had settled over the River Weaver near the village of Frodsham, just outside of Runcorn. 4 local teenagers had ventured into an area known ominously as the Devil's Garden, a patch of fields and woods by the riverbank. They weren't there for any paranormal purpose. In fact, they were there poaching pheasants, which is an illegal hunting venture that they hoped would go unnoticed in the dark of a winter evening. The air was frigid and the ground damp, and the boys huddled quietly among the bushes, waiting for game. Little did they know, they were about to become part of a UFO close encounter story that would make headlines. As the teens crouched in the undergrowth, a glow in the sky caught their attention. Coming from the direction of the river, they observed a ball-shaped object, silvery in colour, gliding low over the water's surface towards them. At first glance, it could have been mistaken for a reflection, or maybe the moon peeking through the clouds, but this was self-illuminated and was moving deliberately. The object was roughly spherical and later estimated to be about 20 feet wide. It floated about 20 feet above the river, with a slight humming sound emanating from it. The sphere had 2 flashing lights on its upper part, one on each side, blinking rhythmically. Around its middle was what looked like a band of windows or portals, emitting a purplish light from within. This eerie purple glow was so intense that the witnesses found it painful to look at directly. At this point, the boys exchanged astonished whispers. Could it be a downed aircraft? Could it be a prank? Notably, just days earlier, the world had been abuzz about a fallen Soviet satellite, Cosmos 954, which crashed in Canada, carrying radioactive material. With that fresh in mind, the teenagers first thought that they might be seeing space debris or a damaged satellite making an unlikely descent in Cheshire. Whatever it was clearly something out of the ordinary. This silvery globe continued its silent approach until, astonishingly, it descended into a thicket of bushes not far from the youth's hiding spot. It wasn't a crash so much as a controlled landing. The object settled gently into the scrub. The boys felt a surge of fear. If this was a satellite, might there be radioactive contamination? They'd heard warnings on the news. The idea that they could be exposed to dangerous radiation panicked them all. For a moment, everything was quiet except for that faint hum. And then, suddenly, movement. A figure emerged from behind the now-landed object. By the glow of the object's purplish light, they could make out what looked like a person in a suit. This being was human-sized, about average adult height, and it was clad in a silvery one-piece outfit that resembled a jumpsuit. It wore a helmet on its head, and atop this helmet was a blinding purple light, described like a miner's lamp, but glowing that same penetrating purple hue. The suit and helmet together gave the figure a distinctly astronaut-like or spaceman appearance. One of the teenagers stifled a gasp. It looked for all the world like a science fiction scene come to life. The being moved with purpose, turning its head slowly, as if it was surveying the area. It then directed its attention to a nearby field adjacent to the Devil's Garden. In that adjacent field stood a small herd of cows belonging to a local farm. These cows were now oddly motionless, almost as if transfixed by something. The strange figure walked toward the fence separating the bushes from the pasture, seemingly studying the livestock in silence. At this point, the boys noticed that the cows, normally skittish at disturbances, were utterly still and silent, almost entranced by the presence of this sphere and its occupant. Moments later, the lone figure was joined by a second entity dressed identically in a silvery suit and helmet with a blinding light stepped out from the craft. Now 2 humanoid figures were visible. Working together, they pulled out a large frame or cage-like apparatus, seemingly made of a light-coloured metal. The 2 figures carried this cage contraption between them and proceeded towards one of the cows. At this point, the teenagers, who were watching from only about 100 yards away, were wide-eyed and trembling. Through the dim light and this purple glow, they saw the two suited beings maneuver this frame around a cow, almost as if measuring or scanning the animal. One boy later described the scene as a terrifying ordeal, not because of any attack on them directly, but due to the sheer strangeness of witnessing these unknown entities interacting with familiar farm animals. The situation felt increasingly dangerous. What if, the boys wondered, when these beings were done with the cows, what if they turned their attention to human subjects next? That thought was enough to break the teenagers' stunned paralysis. In an instant, the four of them decided to get the hell out of there, and without further hesitation, they bolted from their hiding spot and ran for their lives across the fields. Brambles scratched at them, and one boy tripped in a pothole as they fled, but adrenaline pushed them onwards. They didn't dare glance back until they had put at least a mile between themselves and the Devil's Garden. When they finally stopped, panting and hearts pounding, the boys found themselves on the outskirts of Frodsham, along the river. The mysterious sphere, its lights, and the strange spacemen were now far out of sight behind them. Only now, at a safe distance, did they pause to ask perhaps an obvious question. What the hell was that? Gathering their courage, they retraced their steps at least as far as a nearby farmhouse, and they alerted a local farmer. Before long, the story reached a local journalist, Sue McTurk, a reporter for the Runcorn Weekly News, who got wind of the tale and interviewed the youths soon after the incident. They insisted on remaining anonymous, understandably, since admitting they were illegally poaching could get them in a lot of trouble. McTurk took detailed notes of their account, and the very next day, with the memory fresh and emotions high, the boys' testimony remained consistent. They truly believed that they had encountered something not of this world. News of this Cheshire entity sighting quickly spread beyond the local press. The British UFO Research Association, the UK's leading ufology organisation, was notified of the encounter. Jenny Randles, a respected ufologist and then investigator for BUFORA, alongside colleague Paul Wetnell, took a keen interest in the case. Randles had been studying a wave of UFO reports in the late 70s, and this case, with multiple witnesses and a reported landed craft with occupants, was still extraordinary. In fact, it was one of only a pair of humanoid encounters in the region that month. The other was the Rainford Humanoid, and I have got a video about that too if you want to see it. The northwest of England was becoming quite a minor hotspot for close encounters, and BUFORA wanted to investigate thoroughly. However, the investigation faced some hurdles. The witnesses did not want their identities revealed, and that meant they were reluctant to actually meet investigators face to face. And that was a challenge, because UFO investigators rely on interviewing eyewitnesses directly, visiting the scene and corroborating details with them. Instead, Randles and Wetnell had to rely on second-hand notes, specifically the detailed notes taken by Sue McTurk. BUFORA investigators did visit the landing site at Devil's Garden, and they looked for physical traces, scorch marks and impressions on the ground and broken branches or any residue that a 15 to 20 foot glowing craft might have left behind. According to available reports, no obvious physical evidence was found. It's not really surprising, though, given that the object was said to have landed very lightly in the area, and it was an open field with winter vegetation, and any subtle traces could easily have been obscured by frost or subsequent weather. Public reaction to the Runcorn entity story was mixed. Locally, those who heard the boys' accounts were divided. Some found it incredible and frightening. The idea of alien visitors examining livestock in a quiet Cheshire hamlet certainly left an impression. Others were, of course, sceptical, suspecting the teens of fabricating the wild tale, maybe to cover up what they were really doing that night. Could it have just been a prank? The youths swore that it wasn't, and pointed out that they had nothing to gain by coming forward, and in fact risked being found out for poaching. By doing so, they hadn't sought any publicity, no reward, and they asked for anonymity, which is quite the opposite of what a hoaxer would have expected to do. Investigators also considered the good old misidentification explanation. The late 1970s, amid the Cold War, saw various covert activities. Might the silver suits have been protective gear worn by, say, a clandestine army unit conducting an exercise or a hazardous materials team? The being's attire, especially the glowing purple lights and the peculiar detail of square-shaped feet on the suit, as one artist's impression showed, didn't neatly match any known equipment. Besides, what covert army unit is going to bother measuring a cow in a cage? Not to mention the floating illuminated sphere that was also hanging around in the sky. The Runcorn entity sighting challenges us to keep an open mind whilst looking for solid evidence. Until new information does come to light, it resides in that twilight zone of mystery. It's a story to wonder about, something to think about, something to imagine, and something that is absolutely fascinating.